This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
The most quietly devastating piece of evidence, potentially, in the case against Bryan Kohberger, wasn't stained with blood. Didn't need a lab for DNA testing, and didn't even require much explanation at all. It was an ID card, tucked away inside a glove, inside a box, sitting in a house nearly 2,500 miles from the actual murder scene itself. Remember this? There's some speculation on it, and we're going to get to that because some, I'm sure, are screaming at me right now going, wait a second, it was... Okay, we're going to address all that. We're going to be going through all the other evidence in the case against Bryan Kohberger today that maybe you forgot about, because there was a lot that came in right off the bat, a lot on those records that showed what was taken from the homes, or his home. Yeah, two homes. We got the one out there in Washington, and we have the one in Pennsylvania. We're going to go through all of it, and a lot of the pieces that are still sitting out on the ether, what they may mean now with the new discovery that we have and the new pieces that we've learned in this case. And we're going to analyze just how damning some of these pieces might be, if in fact they are what they appear to be. All right? Be sure to press subscribe right now wherever you're downloading podcasts, or if you're watching us on YouTube, so you don't miss any of our coverage on this case. We thank you very much. And I want to encourage you right now in the comments, please leave me your thoughts. Even if you disagree with me, that's fine. That's fine. If you agree, great. Just give me your thoughts. All I want is your opinion. It's a dialogue that we have going on here, not an argument. So the ID wasn't discovered in the early frenzy of the investigation. It wasn't mentioned in the first court filings that lit up every news feed in America. Instead, it showed up in a list, a dry, methodical inventory of items taken from Kohberger's parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, on December 30th of 2022. But it wasn't until March of the following year, when that search warrant return was unsealed, that everyone outside the case even knew it existed. Buried in the document was a line that read simply, ID cards inside glove, inside box. No names, no dramatic labels. But according to several major news outlets, one of those IDs belonged to someone who either lived at or was associated with the King Road house in Moscow, Idaho. The house where the 4 college students were brutally murdered. The ID discovery was largely glossed over on the public narrative at that moment in time. The headline had already crowned the knife sheath as the smoking gun against Bryan Kohberger. The media attention had moved on to the cell tower pings and the DNA from the trash. But this ID, if confirmed to be tied to a victim or a resident of that house, that could be one of the clearest, most haunting physical connections between Kohberger and the victims, and yet, for some reason, it got pushed aside. Like a crucial puzzle piece that was too uncomfortable to stare at for too long. Now, it's important to clarify, the authorities have never officially confirmed who the ID belonged to, okay? So we're covering that right now. I'm not going to sit down here and go, it is one of the people in the house. I know there's been speculation. One of our own contributors has said it many times on the air, especially back when it happened. And many major reputable news outlets have reported that it allegedly belonged to one of the victims. We'll wait for law enforcement and for that information to come out in the actual trial, or if it comes out earlier in one of these unsealings. Due to the gag order, that information is still under tight lock. But the placement of it in a glove, in a box, in his parents' home, feels kind of intentional. It's not something you just toss aside and forget about. It's stored, hidden, preserved. And in cases like this, when a killer keeps something that belonged to the victim, even indirectly, it starts to look like a psychological marker, what investigators sometimes refer to as a trophy. Not in a celebrity sense, but in the deeply unsettling serial offender kind of way. Magical. A piece of the crime that the perpetrator just couldn't let go of. There's a lot of serial killers in history who have done this, who have kept the IDs of their victims. It's a sick thing. And something that's led to a lot of their downfalls as well. And that's just the beginning. There are many other pieces of evidence here that we're about to be talking about. Also taken from Kohberger's family home was a pair of black shoes from Marshall's. At first glance, nothing really remarkable about that prospect at all. Buried in the probable cause affidavit, investigators noted that a shoe print was found outside the sliding glass door at the back of the King Road home, left behind in blood. It was described as a diamond pattern sole, consistent with what you'd see in a Vans-style sneaker. Again, we don't have lab confirmation of a match between Kohberger's shoes and the print at the scene. But the connection is sitting there in plain sight. A pair of shoes, a known tread pattern, a bloody footprint. But the media, surprisingly silent on that one. You think someone might want to know if the shoes match the print, right? But again, a lot of that has remained under seal. Even more quietly collected, a Walmart receipt. One of those long, curling paper trails of impulse and planning. It was recovered with other belongings that could be nothing or everything. What is it going to show? It's going to show the purchase of the gloves or the cleaning products or clothing that matches the description of what the suspect was seen wearing. These aren't hypotheticals tossed into the air. Law enforcement specifically requested access to Kohberger's Amazon and PayPal accounts as part of their search for purchase history tied to the crime. That Walmart receipt is just a physical breadcrumb in what could be a much larger transactional trail. And yet, since it's mentioned in the evidence, it's kind of vanished from public conversation. So we're bringing it up here. A throwaway item that might reveal a whole timeline, as we've now seen other receipts have certainly done. One of the most quietly personal items seized, that'd be a handwritten note to Dad. We don't know what it says. The authorities haven't released it. We don't even know the tone. Was it heartfelt, apologetic, chilling? Just a reminder that, hey, let's go to Subway on the way back to Pennsylvania? Could be anything. All we know is that it was logged in the inventory of evidence, which means someone in law enforcement thought it could be relevant to the case. What we can say with some confidence is that when investigators are looking into possible motive, state of mind, or intent, a personal note becomes an artifact worth reading if it holds even a whisper of acknowledgement or emotion tied to the timeline of the murders. It could be enormously important. And again, silence on this one. Not even a hint of curiosity from a lot of outlets. Everybody's stuck on the knife sheath. And, rightfully so. Those are solid pieces. These are a little more speculative. They could potentially go either way. I am completely admitting that. The fact that some of these things are searched out for in evidence before they even get to there is another sign that they have some idea that maybe these things, or likely these things, are involved in some way, shape, or form in this case. Time will tell, though. There's another matter, the flashlight. Easy to overlook because, well, everyone has one, right? But if you're breaking into a house with no lights at the dead of night where 4 people are sleeping, you're bringing a flashlight. If that flashlight has blood or fiber or prints in the wrong place, that could be another piece of the trail. And if it was listed in the search warrant, return right alongside more obvious suspicious items like gloves and electronics, but didn't get the kind of attention it deserved, maybe it didn't seem sexy enough for primetime coverage. Maybe it was just too easy to ignore. Then we come to the nitrile gloves. These show up in multiple places: in Kohberger's car, in his apartment, in the trash. He was even reportedly wearing gloves when agents surveilled him in Pennsylvania before the arrest. Now, it's possible he was just being cautious. COVID was still kind of a thing at this point in time. We're on the tail end, or one could argue we were out of it. But there were still people masking up and gloving up. Some were, especially in December of 2022. But wearing gloves in your own home, in your parents' house, after a quadruple homicide? A little weird. Hard not to raise an eyebrow to that one. Gives off the impression of someone who's aware of touch DNA, who maybe wrote a paper on touch DNA and all of that, of how to evade being caught after committing a crime like this. Who's thinking about forensic traceability, the kind of awareness that doesn't typically belong to someone with nothing to hide. Again, all conjecture. And finally, there were the shoe boxes and empty packaging. These weren't just cardboard clutter. Investigators were likely looking for signs of what had been recently bought, worn, used, and maybe, just maybe, disposed of after the crime. You don't bring gloves, a weapon, or specific clothing to a crime scene without thinking about what you're going to do with it afterwards. At least, you would think the killer wouldn't do that. If the box remains, but the contents are missing, it's kind of a red flag. It's like finding a holster, but no gun, or a knife sheath with no knife. A tag, but no jacket. The wrapping, but no gift. What ties all of them together is that they were hidden in plain sight, sitting in closets, drawers, trash bins, boxes. And they didn't scream their importance. And they likely wouldn't in many cases. They didn't come with a narrative ready to sell to headlines, but they do matter. These pieces of the puzzle that might never be fully solved in the public eye, but each one adds depth to the picture investigators are building in this case. And yet, after the initial flood of headlines and the warrants being unsealed, most of these items still faded into the background. The ID cards had their moment, the gloves were briefly discussed, but the shoes, the flashlight, the Walmart receipt, almost nothing. It's as if the story became too focused on a single piece of evidence, the knife sheath, and everything else kind of got shoved to the evidence closet, waiting for its day in court, which a lot of it still does. That's why this case has become a story about a mountain of forgotten details, physical clues that once seemed to matter but now live in the footnotes. We don't know how each item fits into the prosecution's theory. We don't know which ones will be presented to the jury or how the defense plans to challenge them, but we do know this: these items didn't get collected by accident. They were seized because they were pointing to something: planning, perception, control, maybe even obsession, or maybe just bought and looked at as being potential items, but, dismissed. While the physical objects tell one side of the story, the tactical material world, they're just the surface, what we haven't seen, and what actually might prove to be even more revealing is what is going on behind the scenes. The trail he left not in boxes or receipts, but in keystrokes, in data. What he searched, watched, clicked, and stored. And that's where we're going next. Because when the headlines started flying in the early days of the Kohberger case, almost all of them clung to one detail like it was the holy grail of the forensic evidence. Of course, the knife sheath. And to be fair, it was a big deal. The U.S. Marine Corps K-bar knife sheath found under one of the victims with DNA on the snap. It is the kind of moment CSI investigators recognize as being a big one. But while the sheath did steal the spotlight, a whole separate trail of forensic work was quietly unfolding behind the scenes, mostly ignored, rarely talked about, and possibly just as important in building the case. Let's start with something subtle, something that doesn't always scream murder weapon, but it has quietly closed the door on many investigations: hair. During searches of Kohberger's apartment and car, investigators found multiple strands of human hair and what was listed in court filings as possible animal hair. It didn't take long for a lot of people to draw the possible connection because one of the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez, had a dog named Murphy. Murphy was left alive inside the King Road home, found unharmed in Kaylee's room. Now, if Kohberger had been in that house and that dog had any physical contact with him, it's not outlandish to imagine that some of the dog's hair might have ended up on Kohberger's clothing. And from there, into his apartment, into his vehicle, onto anything he touched before he changed clothes or tried to clean up. It's a kind of trace evidence that often doesn't hit headlines because it isn't instant. Hair analysis, it takes some time, especially when it involves mitochondrial DNA or matching animal hair to a specific source. But in court, even a single verified strand in the wrong place can speak volumes. And right now, we don't know if that possible animal hair has been conclusively linked to Murphy, the dog. Prosecutors haven't confirmed it, and the gag order keeps that kind of information under wraps. But the fact that it was collected and noted in official documents tells us they saw it as potentially relevant. Same goes for the human hairs. The search warrants mention multiple strands being collected, though there's no detail on length, root presence, or any match to the victims as of yet. What we do know is that these weren't pulled from the crime scene. They were pulled from Kohberger's environment, which opens up the possibility that someone's hair traveled with him after the crime. Maybe it got stuck in the clothing. Maybe it clung to his car seats. Maybe it lodged itself in carpet fibers or laundry. Maybe it's just random hair that he picked up walking around Walmart or something. Again, nothing conclusive has been shared with the public yet, but the silence doesn't mean irrelevance. It usually just means the lab is still working and the trial has not yet started. And then there's the mattress covers. Remember these? During the search of Kohberger's Pennsylvania home, law enforcement seized mattress covers and pillows. They didn't just bag them up and move on. They tested them for blood. This isn't typical unless you believe there's a real chance that the suspect brought something, some residue, some transfer evidence back to the bedding. When you pair that with the other items taken, like cuttings from a reddish-brown stained mattress cover, it becomes clear that investigators weren't just checking boxes. They were looking for proof of contamination. Blood is notoriously difficult to eliminate entirely. Even a faint smear, invisible to the eye, can react under luminol and yield positive results on tests. And if the blood doesn't belong to the suspect, even more reason to investigate further. Even if it is blood. We don't even know if it is blood. The assumption is based on the stain and what they saw. Again, still out there, still in the ether. These are some of those things that we have not heard about because of the seal. Expect more of this to start dropping soon. We don't have confirmation that the blood was from any of the victims or even that the stains, again, were definitely blood. But the fact that cuttings were taken and processed tells us the samples were suspicious enough to analyze further. That investigators looked at it and went, that looks like blood. We do this for a living. We see this on a normal basis. In murder investigations, they often rely on this kind of indirect evidence, traces of blood where it shouldn't be, appearing at times in places that defy innocent explanation. Now let's talk about vacuum dirt, which, yes, sounds less thrilling than a bloody weapon, but is actually a gold mine of trace materials. Investigators vacuumed Kohberger's apartment and collected debris from the floor. This isn't done to find a needle in a haystack by accident. They're looking for micro evidence, slivers of hair, carpet fibers, dust embedded within skin cells, even particles of soil or plant matter. It's the kind of material that can be processed in layers and then broken down and cataloged to build a forensic narrative. Imagine finding a victim's hair fragment or a specific fiber that matches a victim's bedding embedded in the dirt of the suspect's vacuum. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It just needs to be real. That's the power of trace forensics. They don't shout, They whisper. But that whisper is the truth. One of the most quietly pivotal pieces of the entire forensic puzzle, though, came in the form of a pile of trash. Specifically, a bag taken from outside the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania. Inside that trash was DNA from his father. And that DNA was used to link back to the DNA found on the knife sheath, everyone's favorite piece. And of course, that's not accidental. It was a strategic move by law enforcement to build a familial DNA profile when they didn't yet have a court-ordered cheek swab from the suspect himself. And that connection between father and son, between trash and murder scene, was strong enough to justify the arrest. This technique is often called genetic triangulation. It become a standard part of modern investigative playbooks now, but it's rarely appreciated for how decisive it can be. They didn't find Kohberger's DNA in the trash. They found his father's. And it was close enough, statistically and genetically, so strong to support the case that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was the one on the sheath. In the court of public opinion, that detail tends to get overshadowed by the end result. But in the court of law, how you get there does matter. It wasn't guesswork. It was methodical, scientific, and it was precise. Also seized were stained cuttings from other parts of the home. Some may have come from fabric, others from bedding. The documents don't exactly say, and the stains themselves haven't been officially described. They're labeled as reddish or brownish and marked for lab analysis. So we're still in the dark on their origin. It could be, spilled charcoal berry fin Kool-Aid. Or it could be the blood of one of the victims. The very existence of multiple stained samples being carefully preserved and tested, shows just how thorough this forensic process has been. Authorities are working backwards from the possibility that something came back with Kohberger from the scene and embedded itself in the most mundane parts of his everyday life. Then there's the matter of the shoes. Simple detail that's been almost completely forgotten in the public story. When investigators examined the King Road house, they documented a partial shoe print near the back sliding glass door. Again, described as the diamond pattern. Again, does not prove guilt. But it does suggest that whoever left the print might have worn a Van-style shoe or something with a similar sole design. And what was one of the items seized from Kohberger's home? A pair of black shoes. The brand has not been publicly confirmed yet. It's safe to assume they're being evaluated for sole pattern and wear. Shoe print comparison isn't just about matching treads. It's about pressure points, gait patterns, and the depth of imprint. If the shoe from Kohberger's house can be matched physically or statistically to the print at the scene, that could be another thread tying him to the house, physically and directly. But here's the thing. None of this evidence makes big headlines. None of it has cinematic punch of the DNA on the knife. It's all slow. It's all quiet. It's meticulous. It's the work that doesn't get a camera pointed at it. But together, it does build a case, one where the physical aftermath of the crime can also echo into every corner of a suspect's life, into his car, his bed, his trash, his vacuum. These are the threads that don't break easily. They're the ones that stretch across states, through carpet fibers and hair follicles, across time zones and forensic backlogs. While they may not be the centerpiece of every media report, they might end up being the foundation of this case itself once everything is unsealed and we are in that courtroom. Of course, as compelling as these physical and trace clues are, they're still only part of the story because in the background, something else has been quietly compelling. Logs, files, data trails, the kinds of digital footprints that don't rely on fingerprints or footprints at all. Not what he wore or carried, but what he searched, what he bought, what he watched, what he planned. And that trail, that's going to be an interesting one. as we're about to go down that right now. And there's a lot in it. When police searched Kohberger's Pullman, Washington apartment, they walked out with some pretty ordinary-looking items. A computer tower, a flash drive, nothing flashy, pardon the pun. Nothing, again, suspicious on the surface. But if you've spent any time looking into how modern investigations unfold, you know that those pieces of hardware could end up being, again, very revealing pieces of evidence in this case. Think about what you store on your own computer. Now apply that to someone accused of planning and executing a quadruple homicide. A hard drive can carry everything from search histories and downloaded documents, GPS data, maps, cached forums, encrypted logs. If investigators were able to imagine or image that drive and recover deleted material, which, by the way, they almost always can, you're looking at the potential for detailed digital footprints that map out not just what happened, but why. So far, there's been no public disclosure of what was actually recovered from the computer or the flash drive. That's not unusual. Investigators often sit on that kind of evidence until it's needed for court. But the fact that it hasn't leaked, hasn't surfaced in filings, hasn't even been teased in press conferences, adds weight to the silence. Because either there's something too sensitive to release, or there's something they're not ready to show their hands on yet. Or there's nothing at all. Alongside the computer hardware, investigators also went after Kohberger's Amazon and PayPal accounts. Again, that's not snooping into someone's shopping habits. It's looking for purchases that align with the crime. And, well, they found some stuff. A knife, perhaps, maybe gloves, possibly dark clothing, or even something as seemingly innocent as cleaning supplies. The gloves, in bulk, think bleach, think a knife holster, think of flashlights. Those are the kinds of digital breadcrumbs that don't just support a timeline, they can show intent. And as of now, haven't seen all those receipts, but we certainly have seen some. And there's a knife and a sheath and a sharpener and the same type of mask he was reported wearing on some of those receipts. We know that much. While he exactly hasn't been confirmed exactly what he was watching, on television, on Netflix, on his computer, police also seized a Fire Stick device from Kohberger's apartment. Most of us use it to stream Netflix, catch up on the news, maybe fall down a few YouTube rabbit holes. But those viewing histories can be forensically extracted. Was he watching coverage of the murders before or after the crime? Was he researching other cases? Was he looking into how forensic evidence works, how police track suspects, or even studying court procedures? Or was he watching people he admired? People that he thought, I can relate to these guys. I made this point in another video. The button-up shirt, super tight with the thumbs up. Looks a lot like the character in American Psycho. Standing in front of a shower. Psycho, the actual movie. And let's take Kohberger himself. Is he all that far off from the Norman Bates-type character? I don't know. Little conjecture there. But the fact that there seems to be two indirect references in that photo that he took of himself in the shower directly to a movie, two movies with the name Psycho in them, and Ted Bundy with a thumbs up. I know it seems a little questionable. A little more like he's smarter than everybody else in the room and he wants y'all to know it. Until you do, and then you discover, well, he's not the smartest person in the room. So what is on the Amazon Fire Stick? We don't know yet. But those are the kinds of answers investigators tend to look for when they seize your TV stick. Now zoom out, because this next part doesn't come from a hard drive or a smart TV. It came from the airwaves, cell tower data. According to the probable cause affidavit. Kohberger's cell phone was tracked to the vicinity of the King Road house at least 12 times before the night of the murders. Think about that. That's not a wrong turn. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. It's a loop. A set of deliberate paths that show his phone traveling near the victim's residence again and again. Does he have a viable excuse for that? Is that a road he would normally travel for some sort of reasonable reason? We don't know that yet. Most of those visits, according to the affidavit, happened late at night or early in the morning, making it a little more creepy and a little less like a routine drive. And then there's the most unsettling part of that data trail. On the night of the murders, his phone went dark, turned off, disabled, or put into airplane mode. Whatever the method, the effect was the same. From 2:47 a.m. until around 4:48 a.m., the phone left no trace. That blackout window happens to overlap almost perfectly with the estimated time of the murders. Nothing to see here. Here's the thing. Turning off your phone, of course, does not prove guilt, but when you stack it on top of prior movements, the repeated presence near the crime scene and the forensic evidence from earlier chapters, it becomes harder to brush off. It paints a picture of someone who knew what kind of digital evidence could come back to haunt them. Try to avoid leaving it behind. Still, a phone is only one part of the network. Investigators also pulled records from license plate readers and surveillance cameras, including footage showing a white Hyundai Elantra, Kohberger's car, driving past the King Road house multiple times in the early morning hours of November 13th. According to the affidavit, it looped through the neighborhood several times before eventually leaving town just after 4:20 a.m. The same cameras picked up that Elantra, making the return trip westbound towards Pullman a few hours later. The timing is sharp. The vehicle ID is supported by visual confirmation, and the route as laid out in court filings matches the digital trail from Kohberger's cell phone both before and after it went dark. But that one piece of the puzzle still hasn't been fully explored in public. His online activity. The affidavit does not mention Reddit or YouTube or Facebook. Of course, if you dig into the digital warrants that have been filed in the weeks after his arrest, it's clear that investigators were interested in those platforms. They were looking for any signs that Kohberger had interacted with content related to the case, or worse, with the victims themselves. That could mean comment threads under new articles. That could mean posts in crime forums. That could mean YouTube search terms or viewed videos about the murders. And then there's a quiet questions no one has officially addressed yet. Was Bryan Kohberger posting anonymously online about the murders? There's been plenty of speculation about certain Reddit accounts or Facebook users who claim to have inside knowledge and presented inside knowledge. None of it confirmed. But it's not hard to imagine why investigators would at least explore the possibility in high-profile cases. It's not uncommon for suspects to monitor coverage or even insert themselves into the narrative under the cloak of anonymity to try and control the narrative, which we did happen to see here. The character named Papa Roger. Remember that? If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see. If you're listening, I'm showing an image right now of Papa Roger and Bryan Kohberger side by side. It's striking how similar these two individuals look. One is an artistic rendition of what looks to be a general of some sort. But the profile of the individual, the facial layout, it is strikingly similar. And this profile was out there before anyone had named Bryan Kohberger as a suspect. Commenting on the case, giving specific information nobody else knew about the knife sheath, about details of the crime, and telling everyone it's a red herring when they started asking about the Hyundai Elantra. The odds of somebody making this fake profile of Papa Rogers, Papa Roger, I know I'm going to be criticized for that. I know, Roger, putting it up online and talking about things that no one else knows. And it just happens to look pretty much like Kohberger with a military-style hat on. Little weird. Little suspicious. It's another thing that they are certainly taking a very close look at, and I'm sure more things that we will find more out about in the coming months or once trial begin. And while we've seen flashes of it, the cell phone data, the license plate tracking, the shopping records under subpoena, what we haven't seen might be even more important. There could be maps bookmarked on his browser, a journal on his desktop, cached pages of the King Road house pulled from real estate listings, or maybe just Google searches. Harmless, until you line them up with the timeline, until they say something like, how long does DNA last on fabric, or how to clean blood from car seats? Again, that's pure speculation. But those are the kinds of digital trails that tell a story. But they don't tell everything. They don't show up in body cam footage or dramatic courtroom exhibits. They live quietly in metadata and downloaded logs waiting to be brought to light. And maybe that's why the digital evidence feels so elusive, but so powerful if it's there. Because unlike the physical clues, the digital ones don't just suggest that something happened. They can show how he thought about it, get into his mind, what he prepared for, what he feared, what he didn't know. And if any of that shows up on his computer, on his Fire Stick, or buried in his online accounts, then the story we think we know about this case could shift dramatically. Although now, for most of it, it is sitting and it is under seal. Part of a sealed investigation, part of a trial yet to be held. But one thing's clear. The digital dust is finally blown off those devices and those records come to light. We may not just get more proof of what happened. We may get a closer look at who Bryan Kohberger really was and why this happened in the first place. What are your thoughts on all of those items? Let me know in the comments section. Would love to hear your feedback. And be sure to press subscribe wherever you're downloading podcasts, or if you're watching us on YouTube, press subscribe, hit the bell button so you don't miss any of our updates on this case. We have a playlist specifically for this, and we also have a podcast channel specifically for it as well. So please do check all that out, hit subscribe, and yes, we do want to hear from you in the comments. There's a lot to unpack here. More stuff is dropping every single week. We'll see where this goes. We will see where this goes. Let's hear your voices in those comments. I'm Tony Bruschi. Thanks for joining us.
Craving non-stop true crime updates? Press subscribe now and get the latest cases, analysis, and expert commentary delivered straight to your feed. Only from the Hidden Killers podcast and True Crime Today.